Admiral Zektar stood before the massive holographic display aboard the flagship Dominator's Pride, his forearms crossed behind his back as he studied the star charts. The Velthari Empire had conquered 17 star systems in the past decade, each one falling before their superior technology and overwhelming military might. Their species had evolved from apex predators on a harsh world where only the strongest survived, and that philosophy had carried them to the stars. The bridge hummed with activity as officers moved between control stations, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the artificial lighting. Each Velthari stood nearly 8 feet tall, with razor-sharp mandibles and compound eyes that could track multiple targets simultaneously. They were perfect warriors bred for conquest. "Admiral," called out Navigator Clicks from her station, "we're approaching the boundary of what the locals call human space. Our long-range sensors are detecting defensive installations along the border." Zektar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. "Defensive installations? How quaint. What manner of primitive barriers do these humans think they can erect against the might of the Empire?" The Navigator's compound eyes shifted nervously. "Sir, we're also receiving automated broadcasts on multiple frequencies. They appear to be warning messages." "Put them through," Zektar commanded, settling into his command throne. The bridge speakers crackled to life and a voice began speaking in perfect Velthari. "Attention approaching vessels. You are entering human space. This is your first and final warning. Turn back now. We do not wish conflict, but we will defend our territory. Your ships are being tracked. Turn back now." The message repeated in 17 different languages, including several that the Empire's databases couldn't identify. Zektar's four eyes gleamed with predatory interest. These humans had clearly studied them, learning their language and customs. It showed intelligence but also fear. How refreshing, he mused aloud. Usually primitive species simply flee or surrender immediately. These humans actually think they can intimidate us. His second-in-command, Captain Vexmul, approached the command throne. "Admiral, our intelligence reports suggest the humans are a relatively young spacefaring species. They've only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last 2 centuries. Their technology should be far inferior to ours." Zektar nodded approvingly, exactly as expected. "And yet they dare to issue warnings to the Velthari Empire? Their audacity will make their eventual subjugation all the more satisfying." The fleet consisted of 200 warships, each one a testament to Velthari engineering prowess. The smallest frigates could level a city, while the massive dreadnoughts carried enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. They had never encountered a species that could stand against them for more than a few hours. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving another transmission. This one appears to be from a human vessel directly ahead." A new voice filled the bridge, speaking in heavily accented but understandable Velthari. "Velthari Fleet. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Force vessel Resolution. I am authorized to offer you one final opportunity to withdraw. You have been warned repeatedly about entering our space. We do not seek war, but we will not back down." Zektar rose from his throne, his massive frame casting shadows across the bridge. "Put me through to this. Captain Chen." When the connection was established, Zektar's voice boomed across the void between ships. "Human, I am Admiral Zektar of the Velthari Empire. Your species' arrogance amuses me. You face a fleet of 200 warships, each one capable of reducing your pathetic worlds to ash. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift." There was a pause before Captain Chen responded, and when she did, her voice carried an odd note of sadness. "Admiral, you don't understand what you're walking into. Your intelligence is decades out of date. Please, for the sake of your crews, turn back. This is not a fight you want. Threats from a primitive species." Zektar's mandibles clicked rapidly in anger. "You will learn the price of defying the Empire. All ships prepare for battle. Target their vessels and show them the meaning of fear." The Velthari fleet moved forward in perfect formation, their weapon systems charging with deadly energy. On the tactical display, the human ships appeared as tiny dots against the Empire's overwhelming force. It would be a massacre. But Captain Chen's final transmission gave Admiral Zektar pause. "Admiral, we tried to warn you. Remember that when you're explaining this to whoever's left of your government. Humanity has had 2 centuries to prepare for visitors like you. We've been waiting." As the first shots were fired and the battle began, Admiral Zektar couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The human captain had sounded genuinely regretful, as if she pitied them. But that was impossible. The Velthari Empire was unstoppable, a force of nature that swept across the galaxy like a cosmic storm. Soon, he would learn just how wrong that assumption was. The first exchange of fire should have been decisive. Velthari plasma cannons, capable of melting through the strongest known alloys, lanced out toward the human ships. Admiral Zektar watched with satisfaction as brilliant streams of superheated energy crossed the void, certain that the primitive human vessels would be vaporized on contact. Instead, something impossible happened. The human ships didn't even try to dodge. They simply absorbed the plasma streams into what appeared to be their hull plating, glowing briefly before returning to their normal metallic sheen. What? Zektar's four eyes widened in disbelief. Tactical report. Why are those ships still intact? Lieutenant Kekstar frantically worked his console, his compound eyes reflecting the confusion that filled the bridge. Sir, our sensors indicate direct hits on multiple targets. The energy readings were consistent with successful plasma strikes, but somehow the enemy vessels are showing no damage. Before Zektar could respond, the human ships returned fire. But these weren't the primitive kinetic weapons or simple energy beams the Empire's intelligence had suggested. Instead, streams of what looked like liquid lightning arced through space, each one finding its mark with surgical precision. The first Velthari frigate to be hit simply vanished. Not destroyed, not exploded. It was there one moment and gone the next, as if it had never existed. Where the proud warship had been, only empty space remained. Panic began to spread through the fleet communications as ship after ship reported impossible readings. The human weapons weren't just destroying their targets. They were unmaking them at a fundamental level, breaking down matter itself into component atoms. Impossible, Zektar whispered, his predatory confidence beginning to crack. No species has mastered matter disintegration on such a scale. Our intelligence reports indicated they barely understood fusion power. Captain Vexmal approached the command throne, his usual composure replaced by barely controlled fear. Admiral, we're losing ships faster than our computers can track. Whatever technology these humans possess, it's beyond anything in our databases. The tactical display told a horrifying story. In just 5 minutes of combat, the Velthari had lost 37 vessels without inflicting a single casualty on the human force. Their enemy consisted of only 12 ships, each one no larger than a Velthari cruiser, yet they moved through the Imperial fleet like death itself. Sir, the communications officer called out, we're receiving another transmission from the human captain. Put it through, Zektar commanded, though his voice lacked its earlier arrogance. Captain Chen's voice filled the bridge once more, still carrying that note of genuine sadness. Admiral Zektar, you still have 163 ships remaining. I'm offering you one final chance to withdraw. Take your fleet and leave our space. Never return. How? Zektar's voice cracked slightly. How is this possible? Our intelligence indicated that your species had barely mastered spaceflight. Your intelligence was correct, Admiral. 200 years ago, when your first scout ships visited our system, we were indeed primitive, but you made a critical error in your assessment. Another wave of human weapons fire swept through the Velthari formation, and 15 more ships simply ceased to exist. The remaining vessels began to break formation as panic overcame military discipline. What error? Zektar demanded, watching his invincible fleet crumble before his eyes. You assumed we would remain static. Your empire conquers species that are afraid, that cower and hope you'll simply pass them by. But humans, when we learned we weren't alone in the universe, when we discovered that there were predators among the stars, we didn't hide. We prepared. The truth began to dawn on Zektar as he watched another squadron of his ships disappear into quantum foam. You knew we were coming. We've known about the Velthari Empire for 173 years, Admiral. We've watched you conquer system after system, studied your tactics, analyzed your technology. We've had nearly 2 centuries to prepare for this moment. A new voice cut across the communications channel, speaking in perfect Velthari, but with an accent Zektar couldn't place. Admiral, this is Professor Elena Vasquez of the Human Research Consortium. Perhaps you'd like to know what we did with all that time. Without waiting for a response, she continued. We didn't waste it building bigger ships or stronger weapons. We went deeper. We mastered quantum mechanics, learned to manipulate matter at the subatomic level. We developed technologies that your empire, for all its military might, never even imagined possible. More ships died as the humans demonstrated their impossible weapons. Each shot was precisely calculated, each target eliminated with clinical efficiency. There was no waste, no excess, just pure, terrifying competence. You see, Admiral, Professor Vasquez continued, your empire makes the same mistake as all predator species. You assume that because you can kill, you're superior. But intelligence isn't about being the strongest. It's about adaptation, innovation, and preparation. Zektar realized with growing horror that they weren't fighting a battle. They were witnessing an execution. The humans weren't even straining their capabilities. They were simply demonstrating what 2 centuries of focused preparation could accomplish when an entire species dedicated itself to a single goal: survival against overwhelming odds. The proud Velthari Empire, conqueror of 17 star systems, was being systematically dismantled by 12 human ships that fought like they were conducting a physics demonstration rather than a desperate battle for survival. Admiral Zektar's command throne felt more like an electric chair as he watched his fleet die around him. The tactical display showed their numbers dropping steadily, 120 ships, then 100, then 90. Each loss represented decades of construction, thousands of crew members, and the collective pride of the Velthari Empire. Admiral, Navigator Clicks called out, her voice trembling. The human ships are moving in a pattern. They're not just attacking randomly. They're hurting us. Zektar studied the tactical display with the cold focus of a predator, even as his prey instincts screamed at him to flee. The navigator was right. The 12 human vessels were moving with purpose, forcing his remaining ships into a tighter and tighter formation. But why? Sir, the sensor operator reported, I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout this system. It's not coming from the human ships. It's coming from the planets, the asteroids, even the space stations we thought were abandoned. The truth hit Zektar like a physical blow. This entire system is a trap. Captain Chen's voice came through the communications array once more, confirming his fears. You're beginning to understand, Admiral. This isn't just a border patrol. This is our outer defensive perimeter. Every asteroid has been hollowed out and converted into a weapons platform. Every planet in this system has continent-spanning defensive installations. Even the space debris has been weaponized. As if summoned by her words, what Zektar had dismissed as floating wreckage began to unfold like deadly flowers. Metallic structures that had appeared to be random space junk revealed themselves as sophisticated weapons platforms, their surfaces bristling with the same quantum disintegration technology that had been decimating his fleet. How many? Zektar whispered. In this system alone? Approximately 47,000 independent weapons platforms, Admiral. And this is just our outermost defense line. We have 17 such systems between here and our core worlds, each one more heavily fortified than the last. The scale of human preparation was staggering. While the Velthari Empire had been conquering primitive worlds and celebrating their military superiority, humanity had been quietly converting entire star systems into death traps. They hadn't just built defenses, they had reimagined the very concept of warfare itself. You want to know the truly terrifying part, Admiral? Professor Vasquez's voice rejoined the conversation. This represents less than 3% of our total defensive capability. The bulk of our fleet isn't even here. They're protecting our civilian populations while we handle this little misunderstanding. Zektar's tactical mind raced as he processed the implications. If this overwhelming force was merely their border patrol, what kind of military might were the humans hiding in their core systems? The Empire's intelligence had been wrong about everything, catastrophically, impossibly wrong. Your scouts, Zektar said suddenly. The reports from our advanced reconnaissance missions. They said humans were primitive, disorganized, weak. Oh, we made sure your scouts saw exactly what we wanted them to see. Captain Chen replied with what sounded disturbingly like amusement. Primitive settlements, older technology, internal conflicts. We've been putting on quite a show for your intelligence gatherers for the better part of a century. The communications officer on Zektar's bridge suddenly straightened. Admiral, I'm detecting incoming transmissions from everywhere. It appears to be from other human fleets. Put them through, Zektar commanded, though part of him dreaded what he was about to hear. The bridge filled with voices as human commanders from across their territory checked in.
7th Fleet reporting in, Admiral Chen. We've got 3 more Velthari scout forces trying to probe our Epsilon sector.
Should we eliminate them or send them home with a message? 12th Expeditionary Force here. We've been tracking Velthari supply lines back to their staging areas. We could cut them off completely if you give the word. Research Division calling in. We've finished analyzing their weapon signatures. Their plasma technology is actually quite elegant. Primitive, but elegant. Should we demonstrate some of our newer defensive countermeasures? Zektar realized with growing horror that this wasn't an ambush. It was a coordinated operation involving hundreds, possibly thousands of human ships. While he had been leading what he thought was a surprise invasion, the humans had been tracking every move his empire made, analyzing their technology, and preparing responses to threats that hadn't even materialized yet. "How long have you been watching us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since your first expansion beyond your home system, Admiral. We've had observation posts in every territory you've conquered, research teams studying your technology, linguists learning your languages. We know your supply routes, your manufacturing capabilities, your population centers, your political structure. We probably know your empire better than your own government does." The tactical display showed his fleet's numbers continuing to drop. 70 ships, then 60, then 50. But the humans weren't just destroying them. They were studying each ship as they eliminated it, learning from every exchange of fire. "This is impossible," Zektar said, his forearms trembling slightly. "No species has ever been this prepared, this thorough." "Admiral," Professor Vasquez said gently, "you're thinking about this the wrong way. You keep calling us primitive, but you're missing the point. Humans didn't develop faster than light travel until 2 centuries ago, yes. But we've had written language for 5,000 years. We've been planning, preparing, and learning for millennia before we ever left our home planet." The weight of human history pressed down on Zektar's consciousness. While his species had evolved as apex predators and carried that mentality to the stars, humans had evolved as problem solvers. They didn't just react to threats, they anticipated them, prepared for them, and developed solutions before the problems even arose. "Your empire has existed for perhaps 1,000 years, Captain Chen added. "Humanity has been preparing for something like you for 5 times that long. We've been waiting, Admiral, and now you're here." With only 37 ships remaining from his once mighty fleet, Admiral Zektar made a decision that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. His forearms worked frantically across his command console as he opened a direct channel to his home world, bypassing normal military communications protocols. "Emergency transmission to the High Command," he ordered his communications officer. "Priority Alpha. Immediate withdrawal authorization requested." The response came back within minutes, carrying the harsh voice of Supreme Commander Velkoth himself. "Admiral Zektar, explain why you're requesting withdrawal authorization when facing a single primitive species." "Our intelligence indicates the humans should have fallen within the first hour of contact, Supreme Commander," Zektar began, his voice heavy with the weight of impending doom. "Our intelligence was wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The humans are not primitive. They have been preparing for our arrival for nearly 2 centuries. They possess technology that renders our weapons useless and can eliminate our ships at will." There was a long pause before the Supreme Commander responded. "Admiral, have you suffered head trauma? You command 200 of our finest vessels. No primitive species could possibly—" "Sir," Zektar interrupted, something he had never done before in his military career. "I now command 37 ships. 163 vessels have been destroyed in the past 2 hours without inflicting a single casualty on the enemy. Their weapons operate on principles we don't understand, turning our ships into quantum foam. We are facing a species that has had 2 centuries to prepare specifically for us." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of failing systems as more ships died around them. On the main display, human weapons platforms continued their methodical elimination of the Velthari fleet, each shot precisely calculated for maximum efficiency. "Impossible," the Supreme Commander's voice crackled across the void. 2 centuries of preparation means nothing if they lack the industrial base to— "Sir," a new voice interrupted the transmission. It was Captain Chen, somehow having accessed their secured military frequency. "If I may interrupt your conversation, I believe there are some things your government should understand about our capabilities." The bridge erupted in chaos as Velthari officers realized their most secure communications had been compromised. But Zektar raised his hand for silence, recognizing that this might be their only chance to understand what they were truly facing. "How?" Supreme Commander Velkoth demanded. "Our communications are encrypted with quantum—" "Yes, we know about your quantum encryption protocols," Captain Chen replied matter-of-factly. "We've been listening to your military communications for the past 87 years. It's actually quite sophisticated for a first-generation quantum system, but we're currently using 15th-generation protocols. The mathematical foundations you're working from were superseded in our universities about 60 years ago." Admiral Zektar watched his remaining ships count drop to 31 as the humans continued their demonstration. Each elimination was accompanied by detailed sensor data being transmitted to his bridge. The humans were showing them exactly how their technology worked, confident that the knowledge would be useless to a species so far behind their technological curve. "Supreme Commander," Professor Vasquez's voice joined the conversation. "Perhaps you'd like to know what your empire looks like from our perspective. We have observation posts in all 17 of your conquered systems. We know your ship production schedules, your resource allocation, your population distribution. We've been watching you for so long that we have detailed psychological profiles of most of your senior leadership, including yourself." The communication channel filled with what could only be described as stunned silence from the Velthari homeworld. Finally, Supreme Commander Velkoth's voice returned, noticeably less confident than before. "What do you want?" "Nothing," Captain Chen replied simply. "We don't want your territory, your resources, or your technology. We have everything we need. We simply want to be left alone. That's why we warned you to stay away. That's why we've been sending increasingly clear messages for the past century. We hoped you would be wise enough to heed those warnings." Admiral Zektar's tactical display showed 23 ships remaining. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically to keep their own vessel functional as human weapons continued to eliminate the invasion force with surgical precision. "But you invaded anyway," Professor Vasquez continued, her voice carrying a note of disappointment. "Your species' predatory nature prevented you from recognizing that the warnings weren't threats. They were genuine attempts to avoid this outcome." "We didn't want to do this, Supreme Commander. We tried to prevent it. What happens now?" Zektar asked, his question directed as much to his own leadership as to the humans who were systematically destroying his command. "Now," Captain Chen said, "you have a choice to make. Your admiral can take his remaining ships and leave our space. Return to your empire and explain what you've learned here. Tell them that humanity will not be conquered, that we have prepared for this possibility since we first learned we weren't alone in the universe." The communications channel crackled with interference as another wave of human weapons fire reduced the Velthari fleet to 17 vessels. Each shot was still precise, still calculated, still completely irresistible against their defenses. "Or," Captain Chen continued, "you can continue fighting and lose every ship in your fleet. The choice is yours, Supreme Commander. But understand this. What you've witnessed today is humanity holding back. We've been using only our defensive systems and only a tiny fraction of them. Our actual military capabilities remain untested against an enemy force." Supreme Commander Velkoth's voice, when it finally came, sounded hollow and defeated. "Admiral Zektar, you are ordered to withdraw immediately. All ships retreat to the border and await further instructions." But Zektar had one more question, one that had been burning in his mind since the battle began. "Captain Chen, why? Why warn us at all? Why not simply destroy our fleet the moment we entered your space?" Her answer chilled him to his core. "Because that's what you would have done, Admiral. But we're not you. We believe in giving people the chance to make better choices, even when those people are our enemies. Every warning we sent was genuine. We hoped you would be wise enough to listen." The journey back to Velthari space felt longer than the trip out, though Admiral Zektar's remaining 14 ships traveled at maximum speed. Every sensor sweep, every shadow on the star charts made his crew jump, expecting human ships to materialize from nowhere and finish what they had started. But the humans had kept their word. Once his fleet had crossed back over the boundary into neutral space, they had simply vanished, leaving no trace of their overwhelming technological superiority. The debriefing chambers on the Velthari homeworld had never seen such chaos. Supreme Commander Velkoth paced behind a massive conference table as military leaders, scientists, And intelligence chiefs struggled to comprehend the reports flowing in from Admiral Zektar's surviving crews. "Show me again," Velkoth commanded, his forearms gesturing toward the holographic display that dominated the center of the room. "Show me these impossible human weapons." Admiral Zektar activated the tactical recordings from the battle, his mandibles clicking nervously as the display filled with images of Velthari's ships simply ceasing to exist. "As you can see, Supreme Commander, their weapons don't simply destroy, they unmake matter at the quantum level. Our shields, our armor, our hull plating, none of it matters when the enemy can manipulate reality itself." Chief Science Minister Kelvox studied the readings with growing alarm. "These energy signatures, they're not using brute force. They're exploiting fundamental properties of matter that our physics barely acknowledge exist. How long would it take us to develop comparable technology?" "Centuries," came the flat response from Admiral Zektar. "Maybe millennia." They weren't just more advanced, they were operating from entirely different theoretical foundations. It would be like trying to understand nuclear physics when you've barely discovered fire. The intelligence briefing that followed painted an even grimmer picture. Human observation posts had been identified in every system the Empire controlled. Not hidden bases or cloaked ships, but permanent installations that had been operating for decades without detection. The implications were staggering. Everything the Empire had done, every military strategy they had developed, every weakness they possessed, was known to their human watchers. "They've been studying us like insects under glass," Intelligence Director Nexeval reported, his compound eyes dim with humiliation. "Every communication we've intercepted, every prisoner we've taken from conquered worlds. It was all part of their intelligence-gathering operation. They know us better than we know ourselves." Supreme Commander Velkoth slammed his primary fist onto the conference table. "Then we mobilize everything. Every ship, every warrior, every weapon in the Empire. If they want war, we'll give them war." "Sir," Admiral Zektar said quietly, "with respect, you don't understand the scope of what we're facing. The human force that destroyed my fleet represented less than 3% of their total defensive capability. They have 17 fortified systems between their border and their core worlds. Each one is more heavily defended than the last." The room fell silent as the military leadership absorbed this information. General Vixmar, veteran of 12 conquest campaigns, spoke first. "What about our allies? The Kethnari Collective, the Zolthan Hegemony? Combined, we could field 10 times the ships you faced." Professor Vasquez had provided the answer to that question during their final communication, and Zektar relayed it now with growing dread. "The humans have been in contact with every species in the galaxy for the past 50 years. They've shared defensive technologies, established mutual defense pacts, and created an intelligence-sharing network that spans known space. Our allies received human technology upgrades decades ago. The implications hit the room like a physical blow. The Velthari Empire's military superiority had been built on facing isolated, technologically inferior opponents. But the humans had quietly united the galaxy against them, turning their own divide-and-conquer strategy into their greatest weakness. They've been playing a game we didn't even know existed," Intelligence Director Nexeval added. "While we were focused on conquest through military might, they were building a coalition through shared knowledge and mutual cooperation. They've turned our greatest strength, our military power, into our greatest vulnerability." Supreme Commander. Velkoth's rage was slowly being replaced by something the Velthari rarely experienced: fear. "What do they want from us?" Admiral Zektar activated another recording from his communications with Captain Chen. Her voice filled the chamber, calm and measured, despite speaking to her species' greatest enemy. "We want you to leave us alone. Return to your own space, stop your expansion, and learn to coexist peacefully with your neighbors. The age of conquest is over, Supreme Commander. We've made sure of that." The recording continued with Professor Vasquez's voice. "We don't want to destroy the Velthari Empire. Extinction isn't justice, it's just another form of barbarism. But we will defend ourselves and our allies. If you continue your aggressive expansion, you'll face the united response of every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy." Chief Science Minister Kelvox leaned forward. "They're offering us a choice, adapt or perish. But how do we adapt? Our entire society is built around military conquest. Our economy, our culture, our political system. It all depends on continuous expansion." "Then perhaps," Admiral Zektar said slowly, It's time for the Empire to change. The words hung in the air like a blasphemy. The Velthari had been apex predators for millions of years. The concept of voluntary restraint, of choosing cooperation over conquest, was as alien to them as quantum mechanics had been to their ancestors. But as they studied the tactical data from humanity's demonstration of power, one fact became undeniably clear. The age of the Velthari Empire's unchallenged dominance was over. The question now wasn't whether they could conquer the humans. It was whether they could learn to survive in a galaxy where humanity had already won. 6 months after the disastrous encounter at the human border, the Velthari Empire faced its greatest crisis in 1,000 years. Supreme Commander Velkoth stood before the Imperial Council, his forearms trembling slightly as he prepared to speak words that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. "Honored counselors," he began, his voice carrying none of its usual commanding presence. "I come before you today to recommend that the Empire formally request diplomatic contact with the human government." The council chamber erupted in angry chittering and mandible clicking as representatives from across the Empire voiced their outrage. Councillor Texvar, representing the military caste, rose to his full 8-foot height. "Supreme Commander, you speak of surrender. The Velthari do not negotiate with prey species." "Prey species?" Velkoth's compound eyes fixed on the councillor with bitter irony. "Honored Texvar, I have reviewed Admiral Zektar's tactical recording 17 times. We are the prey in this scenario. We have been prey since the moment we first encountered humanity, whether we knew it or not." The intelligence reports that followed painted a picture of systematic humiliation. Human observation posts had been recording Velthari military exercises for decades. Their manufacturing centers had been infiltrated by what they now realized were human intelligence operatives. Even their most secure government facilities had been compromised by surveillance technologies that their scientists still couldn't understand. Admiral Zektar, now bearing the scars of his encounter with human technology, both physically and mentally, addressed the council with the hollow voice of a broken warrior. "Counselors, we discovered that 3 of our conquered species have been in regular contact with Earth for over 40 years. The humans have been providing them with defensive technologies and coordinating resistance movements. We haven't been ruling an empire. We've been occupying territories that exist only because humanity allows them to exist." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. The proud Velthari Empire, master of 17 star systems, had been living in a carefully constructed illusion. Their conquered subjects weren't cowering in fear. They were biding their time, protected by human guarantees and armed with human technology. Councillor Nix then, representing the intelligence services, provided the most devastating update of all. "Our deep space monitoring stations have detected massive human fleet movements over the past month. Not toward our borders, but away from them. They're not preparing to attack us, they're withdrawing their forces because they no longer consider us a threat." The ultimate insult: humanity wasn't even taking them seriously anymore. The empire that had terrorized a dozen species was now seen as such a minor concern that Earth was redeploying its military assets elsewhere. "What does humanity want from us?" Councillor Velneth demanded. "What are their terms for coexistence?" Supreme Commander Velkoth activated a communication device that had been delivered by human courier just days earlier. Captain Chen's voice filled the chamber, speaking in flawless Velthari with what sounded like genuine sympathy. "Members of the Imperial Council, I speak to you not as an enemy, but as a representative of a species that has learned to look beyond its predatory origins. Humanity does not seek the destruction of the Velthari Empire. We seek its transformation." The message continued with terms that would have been inconceivable to previous generations of Velthari leaders. "We propose a gradual transition away from conquest-based expansion toward cooperative development. Your occupied territories will be granted independence, but Earth will provide technological assistance to help your empire develop sustainable economic alternatives to military expansion." Professor Vasquez's voice joined the recording. "We're offering you something unprecedented in galactic history, the chance for a predator species to evolve beyond its origins. We'll share our technological advances, our scientific discoveries, our cultural innovations. But in exchange, the age of Velthari conquest must end permanently." The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity wasn't just offering peace, they were offering evolution. the chance for the Empire to become something greater than what it had been. But the offer came with conditions that struck at the heart of Velthari identity. All aggressive military operations must cease immediately. All occupied territories must be granted autonomous status within 5 standard years. All weapon development programs focused on conquest rather than defense must be terminated. Counselor Texvar's mandibles clicked with fury. They ask us to abandon everything that makes us Velthari. Our strength, our military superiority, our rightful place as masters of the galaxy. Admiral Zektar's response carried the weight of harsh reality. Honored Counselor, our military superiority was an illusion. Our rightful place was never as masters. It was as students who refused to learn. The humans are offering us the chance to become something better than conquerors. They're offering us the chance to survive. The vote that followed was closer than anyone had expected. Traditional hardliners argued for continued resistance, convinced that Velthari honor demanded they fight regardless of the odds. But pragmatists, led by those who had studied the human intelligence reports, recognized the truth that Admiral Zektar had learned at such terrible cost. When the final count was tallied, the Velthari Empire voted by the narrowest possible margin to accept humanity's terms. The age of conquest was over, not because they had been defeated in glorious battle, but because they had finally encountered a species that had already transcended the need for such primitive solutions. As Supreme Commander Velkoth transmitted their acceptance to Earth, he reflected on the bitter irony of their situation. The Velthari had sought to conquer humanity, and instead discovered that humanity had already conquered the galaxy. Not through force, but through patience, preparation, and the revolutionary concept of voluntary cooperation. The Empire was warned to stay away, yet they dared to enter human space. Now they understood why those warnings had been given not in anger, but in mercy. Humanity had tried to spare them this humbling lesson, but the Velthari had insisted on learning it the hard way. The great predators of the galaxy had finally met their match, and discovered that true dominance wasn't about being the strongest. It was about being wise enough to make strength unnecessary.